In the forgotten annals of time, where history is written not in ink but in blood and tears, there are stories that lie buried. They are not tales of heroes or glorious conquests, but of shadows that devour the light and crowns forged in the fires of betrayal. This is one such tale, a story etched into the cold, silent stones of a fallen kingdom, a tragedy that whispers of a paranoid king, a heartbroken queen, and a princess born into a gilded cage destined for ruin. We journey back to the kingdom of Eldoria, a realm once prosperous, now a mere ghost on the wind. Here, a throne was built not on foundations of justice, but on the shifting sands of ambition and deceit. It was called the Throne of Shadows, and it demanded a price from all who dared to approach it, a price paid in souls, sorrow, and silence. This is the dark history of how that price was collected, and how an entire dynasty was consumed by the very darkness that gave it power. King Thuron was never meant to wear the crown. He was born a second son, a life destined for the periphery, forever walking in the shadow of his elder brother, the celebrated heir. But where his brother was blessed with charisma and honor, Thuron was cursed with a ferocious, gnawing ambition. He saw power not as a birthright to be inherited, but as a prize to be seized, no matter the cost. His rise was a brutal symphony of calculated cruelty and whispered promises. He forged alliances in the dead of night, turning minor lords against their masters with threats and gold. He learned the art of the poisoner's chalice and the assassin's blade, understanding that true power often grew from the graves of one's enemies. The official histories, written by scribes who feared him, speak of a swift and decisive civil war where his brother tragically fell in battle. But the shadows tell a different story, a tale of a hunting trip gone wrong, of a single, well-placed arrow, and a convenient accident that left the path to the throne clear. Thuron ascended not to the sound of cheers, but to the silence of a terrified court, his crown secured by fear and a secret buried deep in the unforgiving earth. To legitimize his blood-stained rule, King Thuron sought a queen whose virtue was as renowned as his cruelty was feared. He found her in Seraphina, a princess from a distant, sun-drenched land, her hand in marriage the price of a fragile peace treaty. When Queen Seraphina arrived in Eldoria, it was as if a single, radiant sunbeam had pierced the perpetual gloom of the palace. She was grace and wisdom personified, her kindness a stark contrast to the iron-fisted reign of her new husband. She moved through the cold, stone halls of the citadel of whispering stone like a phantom of light, attempting to mend the fractures in the kingdom's soul. She established orphanages, listened to the pleas of the common folk, and tempered the king's harshest decrees with gentle counsel. For a brief, fleeting moment, the people of Eldoria felt a flicker of hope. They adored their queen, seeing in her a compassion the throne had long lacked. But Thuron saw her popularity not as an asset, but as a threat. His love, if it could be called that, was a possessive, jealous thing. The queen was his most beautiful acquisition, a symbol of his power, yet he trusted her no more than he trusted the vipers in his own court. A year into the tense and loveless marriage, a new light appeared in the kingdom. Princess Lyra was born. She was the perfect blend of her parents, inheriting her mother's ethereal beauty and her father's striking, dark hair. To the kingdom, she was the jewel of Eldoria, a symbol of a brighter future, a promise that the darkness of the past could be washed away by the innocence of a new generation. Celebrations erupted across the land, a genuine outpouring of joy for the infant princess. But within the palace walls, her birth was viewed through different prisms of ambition and fear. For Queen Seraphina, Lyra was her reason for being, a precious soul to be protected from the creeping rot of the court. She showered her daughter with affection, trying to build a fortress of love around her fragile innocence. For King Thuron, however, the princess was something else entirely. She was his legacy, the ultimate proof of his dynasty's legitimacy. He saw her not as a daughter, but as a strategic asset, a pawn to be married off to the highest bidder to forge an unbreakable alliance. The birth of the princess was not the beginning of a happy story. It was merely the setting of another piece on a board where the game was already rigged for tragedy. The joy following Princess Lyra's birth was short-lived. a flickering candle flame easily snuffed out by the encroaching winds of paranoia. The citadel of Whispering Stone earned its name in these years. The very walls seemed to have ears, and every tapestry seemed to hide a spy. King Thuron, haunted by the ghost of the brother he had murdered, saw betrayal in every shadow and conspiracy in every friendly gesture. His chief advisor, the cunning and manipulative Chancellor Valerius, fed this paranoia, whispering venom into the king's ear, pointing out potential rivals and fabricating plots to consolidate his own influence. Courtiers who showed too much loyalty to the beloved Queen Seraphina were quietly removed, either exiled to distant fortresses or succumbing to sudden, convenient illnesses. The atmosphere in the palace grew thick with fear. Laughter became a rarity, replaced by hushed conversations and the constant, unnerving feeling of being watched. The queen felt this shift most acutely. Her ladies-in-waiting were replaced with the chancellor's spies, and her letters home were read before being sent. The palace was no longer a home, it was a prison, and the shadows were growing longer with each passing day. A throne built on fear must be maintained by terror. King Thuron's paranoia soon metastasized into an insatiable hunger for absolute power. The kingdom of Eldoria was not enough. He dreamed of an empire, with his name spoken in hushed, fearful tones across the entire continent. He launched a series of brutal, costly wars against neighboring lands, draining the kingdom's coffers and spilling the blood of a generation of its young men. To fund his campaigns, he levied crushing taxes upon his people, turning their adoration for the queen and their hope in the princess into bitter resentment for the crown. He trusted no one. His generals were rotated constantly to prevent them from gaining the loyalty of their own men. He saw enemies not only across the borders but within his own bedchamber. His obsession with control warped his view of his family. He began to see Queen Seraphina's quiet dignity as defiance and Princess Lyra's innocence as a weakness he must forge into a weapon. His ambition was a black hole, consuming all light, all warmth, all reason, leaving only a cold, dark void where a king's heart should have been. The throne of shadows was no longer just his seat of power, it was his entire world. Trapped in her gilded cage, Queen Seraphina became a specter of sorrow. Her radiance dimmed, overshadowed by the suffocating gloom of her husband's tyranny. She was a queen in name only, her influence systematically dismantled by the king and his manipulative chancellor. Her pleas for mercy for the common folk were dismissed as naive sentimentality. Her attempts to counsel her husband against his ruinous wars were met with cold, dismissive anger. She was utterly alone, an outsider in a court that rewarded cruelty and punished kindness. Her nights were sleepless, filled with the ghosts of those her husband had destroyed and the terrifying premonition of what was to come. Her only solace was her daughter, Princess Lyra. In the privacy of the royal gardens, the queen would read to the princess, telling her stories of her own sunny homeland, tales of honor and courage that were a world away from the grim reality of their lives. These stolen moments of peace were tinged with a desperate sadness, for the queen knew she was raising a lamb in a slaughterhouse. Her tears, shed in the silent darkness of her chambers, were for a kingdom she could not save, a husband she could not reach, and a daughter she could not protect. Princess Lyra blossomed into a young woman of breathtaking beauty and quiet grace, a living echo of the queen she so adored. But her life was one of hollow splendor. She was adorned with the finest silks and jewels, yet she was a prisoner within the palace grounds, her every move monitored. Her world was confined to the gardens and the library, her only friends the songbirds and the characters in her mother's books. She understood, with the painful clarity of a caged bird, that her life was not her own. She was her father's most valuable possession, a political tool to be wielded at the opportune moment. That moment arrived when the king's treasury ran dry from his endless wars. He brokered a deal with a savage, northern warlord, Princess Lyra's hand in marriage in exchange for a mountain of gold and an army of mercenaries. The princess was horrified. The thought of being wed to such a brutal man, of being sent far from her beloved mother to a cold, unforgiving land, was a fate worse than death. Her innocence was a fragile shield, now shattered by the cold, hard reality of her father's ambition. Her destiny, once a beacon of hope for the kingdom, was now a chain, pulling her toward an abyss of despair. Desperate to save her daughter from a monstrous fate, Queen Seraphina began a frantic, secret search for some form of leverage against the king, some long-forgotten law or treaty that could protect the princess. Her search led her to the deepest, most neglected archives of the palace, to a locked chest belonging to the former king's most loyal scribe. Inside, she found not a legal document, but a hidden journal. As she read the faded script by candlelight, her blood ran cold. The scribe's final entry detailed the truth of the old king's death and the accidental fall of his heir. It was not a tragic hunting accident. It was murder. King Thuron had not won a civil war. He had ambushed and killed his own brother in cold blood, pushing him from a ravine during a storm. The entire foundation of his reign, his crown, his power, it was all built upon the ultimate betrayal, fratricide. The truth was a poison more potent than any in the kingdom. Armed with this devastating secret, the queen confronted Thuron, not with a threat, but with a tearful plea to save their daughter, to show 1 ounce of mercy. But in his eyes, she saw not remorse, but the terrifying glare of a cornered beast. The secret was out, and the final act of their tragedy was about to begin. A secret of such magnitude cannot be contained. Whether the queen confided in the wrong person or a servant overheard the confrontation, the story of the king's fratricide spread like wildfire through the discontented kingdom. It was the spark that ignited the inferno. The people, already crushed by taxes and starved by famine, now had a focal point for their rage. The king was not just a tyrant. He was a usurper, a murderer of his own blood. Rebellion, once a collection of scattered whispers, erupted into a singular, deafening roar. Led by disgruntled nobles and vengeful commoners, the people rose up. They stormed the citadel of whispering stone, their fury washing over the palace guards. The carefully constructed edifice of fear that King Thuron had built for decades crumbled in a single night of fire and bloodshed. The screams of the dying echoed through the same halls where Princess Lyra had once played. The grand tapestries depicting the king's glorious victories were torn down and set ablaze, the smoke choking the very air within the palace. The throne of shadows, once the symbol of absolute power, was about to be submerged in a river of blood. In the heart of the chaos, as the sounds of the rebellion grew closer, King Thuron finally broke. His mind, twisted by paranoia and rage, saw only one culprit for his downfall, his wife. He believed Queen Seraphina had deliberately exposed him, that her love for their daughter was a mere pretense for her betrayal. He found her in the throne room where she was trying to find a way to get to Princess Lyra's chambers. He confronted her, his face a mask of madness, his eyes wild with fury. He accused her of treason, of destroying everything he had built. Seraphina did not deny it or beg for her life. She simply looked at him with profound, heartbreaking pity. That look of pity was the final insult to his shattered pride. As the throne room doors began to splinter under the force of the mob, he seized a decorative dagger from the wall. He did not give her a quick end. It was a cruel, intimate act of violence, a final, twisted expression of his possessive love. Her last breath was a whispered, unheard plea not for herself, but for her daughter Lyra. The queen, the kingdom's only beacon of light, died on the cold stone floor at the foot of the very throne that had sealed her fate. When the rebels finally smashed through the doors of the throne room, they did not find a defiant king ready for his last stand. They found a broken man, staring blankly at the body of the queen he had just murdered, the bloody dagger still limp in his hand. The sight of their beloved queen dead at his feet turned the mob's fury into something monstrous. They fell upon him not as soldiers defeating an enemy, but as wolves tearing apart their prey. They stripped him of his royal robes, his crown clattering unceremoniously onto the blood-stained floor. They dragged him from his palace and through the streets of the city he had terrorized for so long. The people who had once feared his gaze now spat on him and pelted him with stones. His downfall was not a noble tragedy. It was a pathetic, humiliating end. At dawn, what was left of King Thuron was brought to a crude scaffold in the main square. There was no trial, no last words. He was executed before the jeering crowd, his death a spectacle of public vengeance. The man who had clawed his way to the throne of shadows died in the mud, his name forever a curse on the lips of his people. In the bloody aftermath, no one came to save Princess Lyra. She was not seen as an innocent victim, but as the last living remnant of a hated regime, the serpent's spawn. The new rulers, a council of ambitious lords who were just as ruthless as the king they had overthrown, saw her as a potential rallying point for royalist factions. They could not risk marrying her off, nor could they afford the political fallout of a public execution. So they chose a crueler fate. Princess Lyra was locked away in the highest tower of her own palace, the very room where she had once dreamed of a life beyond the walls. Her existence was erased. Her name was struck from the records. She was fed just enough to survive, but she was given no company, no books, no comfort. She spent her days watching the world from a single, barred window, a silent ghost haunting her own home. The vibrant, hopeful girl slowly faded, her spirit eroded by a solitude so profound it was a living death. History does not record how or when she finally died. She simply vanished, her quiet, lonely end a final, tragic whisper in the Citadel's long history of sorrow. The jewel of Eldoria was lost to the darkness, forgotten by the world. The death of the royal family did not bring peace to Eldoria. The rebellion that had united the people in their hatred of the king quickly dissolved into a bitter power struggle among the very lords who had led it. The kingdom fractured, breaking apart into a dozen warring fiefdoms. The land bled for another generation, suffering under the boots of petty warlords and opportunistic tyrants. The citadel of Whispering Stone was abandoned, its treasures looted, its grand halls left to crumble under the weight of time and neglect. The throne of shadows, the object of so much ambition and the cause of so much pain, was eventually covered in dust and cobwebs, its dark legacy a poison that had seeped into the very soil of the land. The story of King Thuron, Queen Seraphina, and Princess Lyra faded from written history into folklore, a grim cautionary tale told by grandparents to warn against the corrupting nature of power. The kingdom they once ruled ceased to exist, its name becoming just another forgotten word in a long litany of fallen realms, a testament to the truth that even the most powerful thrones can be turned to gravestones. The tale of the Throne of Shadows is a somber reminder that power built on betrayal is a fortress built on sand. It consumes all who seek it, the guilty and the innocent alike. King Thuron's ambition dug a grave deep enough for his entire family and kingdom. Queen Seraphina's goodness was a fragile shield against a storm of malice, and it was ultimately broken. Princess Lyra's innocence was a currency spent by others, leaving her bankrupt of hope and life. Their names may be forgotten, their faces lost to time, but their tragedy is a timeless echo. It speaks of the darkness that lurks in the human heart, the ease with which ambition sours into tyranny, and how the pursuit of a crown can leave one with nothing but ashes. The stones of Eldoria hold no memory of their laughter or their tears, only the eternal, chilling silence of what was lost. Their story is a scar on the face of history, a permanent mark of pain that never truly fades. History bleeds, and its echoes are written in the cries of kings, queens, and lost princesses. This was the Fear Room. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more dark history tales.